take out their iPhone and then, in the case of a judge, this person is behaving in such a bad way that they shouldn't be a judge, and I make a complaint to the Judicial Council. Where do you draw the line?
Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Beneath the Law. My name is Gavin Ty. I'm here with my partner, good friend, colleague, Stephen Teal.
How are you doing, Gavin?
I couldn't be better. Thanks for asking. We are about to talk about a very, I guess it's disappointing to some extent, story involving the judiciary in Canada, and an incident that has led to the resignation of a justice of the Supreme Court of Canada in what was, I would have to say, as far as the judge goes, sort of prime time of that judge's career. And this all occurred earlier this month in June of 2023, when in a fairly unprecedented move, Justice Brown stepped down from the Supreme Court of Canada. Of course, anyone listening outside of Canada, that is the highest judicial office in the country. The Supreme Court is certainly very much that, supreme in the sense that its edicts and rulings govern all courts beneath. And one of the major planks of policy in the country. So from a judicial perspective, the zenith of a judicial career. Justice Brown stepped down in a fairly troubling set of circumstances that involved a altercation that he had with some individuals in Arizona when he was attending a conference. I believe he was a speaker at the conference.
He was a speaker at a conference, and just to interject here, Gavin, got after this presentation, was in a bar in the hotel there in Arizona, as you say, and had been invited by a group of people to join them at their table. Came over and, according to the allegations that were made against him, he read from his speech that he had given. I guess was getting friendly with the table guests, in terms of talking about himself. But then when the group left for the evening, and we're talking, it was late in the evening, it was something like 11 o'clock is my understanding, or maybe even later than that, allegedly followed the group back to their hotel rooms, and then became involved in a physical altercation with a former U.S. Marine. Some of the guests were women, and according to the complaint that was filed by the U.S. Marine, and we'll get to the complaint because that's really what started Justice Brown on the road here to, or the reasons for his resigning and stepping down from the court, that they, quote, felt creeped out by, Justice Brown's, behavior. Allegedly was clearly intoxicated at the time, and according to the Marine veteran, Justice Brown pushed him. The Marine veteran pushed back and then actually punched him a couple of times, and eventually made a complaint to the Canadian Judicial Council with respect to Justice Brown's behavior. Now, my understanding, Gavin, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Justice Brown denied the narrative of the Marine and basically said that he had been punched without provocation. The police were called. They were called, an hour or two after the altercation, is my understanding. There were no charges that were laid. The police were actually called by the Marine veteran and not Justice Brown.
Yes.
So,
and in fact,
that's kind of interesting in and of itself. But
yes, well, interesting because I think the narrative goes that the initial reaction of the police was that they contemplated charging the Marine, the ex-Marine. By the way, I think he was in his mid-30s. Justice Brown would have been in his mid to late 50s.
Right.
So you've got a significantly younger and presumably physically fit individual punching out an older, allegedly drunken fellow. And the police in that instance contemplated charging that person, I believe his name was Crump, in regards to that incident, but no criminal charges were laid anywhere. I don't believe that there's a civil suit in the U.S. in regards to this.
I'm certainly not aware of one, and my understanding from the investigating police officers' description was, yes, no charges were laid against anybody, and that the use of force in the view of the police officer was, quote, reasonable and necessary, end quote.
So look, I mean, the bottom line is, regardless of the niceties of who started up with who and what have you, there's no question, I think, that it is unseemly. The entire situation was unseemly for this a judge of the Supreme Court of Canada to be in that situation. And I want to talk about that a bit later, because I think that it is an extraordinary responsibility of the judiciary and many people in public life, that I think it is a serious, it's a vocational commitment as opposed to just a job. So talk about that a bit later. But I wanted to point out that there are no other proceedings pending. There are no criminal proceedings pending. There are no civil proceedings pending. There were competing narratives as to who got in whose face, so to speak, and who was pushing whom, and whether there was, I think there were allegations of touching of some of the female unwanted advances, that type of thing. Anyway, all of which was denied and disputed. Suffice it to say that there were competing narratives of what went on, and the only body to be looking into that, as I understand matters, was the Canadian Judicial Council, that to whom the complainant, Mr. Crump, the ex-Marine, had made a complaint, and they were investigating the incident. Justice Brown had stepped away from the court while this was occurring, because obviously, if nothing else, this is a huge distraction, given the salacious nature of the allegations. And they were investigating what went on. And as I understand matters, it was in the course of that investigation, before any facts had been found, before any decision had been made, certainly before any penalty had been meted out, or for that matter, any exoneration had been meted out by that council, Justice Brown decided to step down from the bench, resign from the Supreme Court of Canada. And the impact of that was that immediately stopped the investigation by the Canadian Judicial Council, who draw their jurisdiction from the fact that they are investigating a sitting member of the judiciary, which he was no longer a member. So that effectively stopped the investigation in its tracks, and I suppose we will never know what actually went on in Arizona.
Well, and you're right, Gavin. The Canadian Judicial Council stopped its investigation. There will be no decision rendered. And I think, it's unfortunate all around. It's certainly unfortunate for, I guess, former Justice Brown now, that there really will be no resolution to this incident. And I say it's unfortunate because, I think once you become appointed as a judge or any kind of adjudicator, obviously the person who's appointed has a great responsibility to carry themselves in all forms of their life with a high level of integrity. And, the reality, however, is that, where do you draw the line in terms of, you're out at a conference, you've had a few drinks, that may cause you to be lightheaded, and all of a sudden somebody decides, hey, I know that guy's a judge, or I know that person's really prominent, decides to take out their iPhone, and then, in the case of a judge, this person is behaving in such a bad way that they shouldn't be a judge, and I make a complaint to the Judicial Council. Where do you draw the line?
Well, it's a great question. I recall that there was a recent incident in Toronto that was reported in the media about I think a fairly well-known physician who was seen and videotaped. Everybody videotapes everything now. Intoxicated in a public place, and that was then put online, and there was great outrage about the fact that a physician would be seen in this state. But I think that this brings me back to my point. I think that it's a remarkable vocation and a difficult one to become a judge. And I think it's something that people don't really appreciate. We think that, judges are very well, they're well compensated, they're well respected, but it's an enormous responsibility. I recall you and I both had the privilege to work for a retired judge after he retired from the Court of Appeal, and so many words of wisdom from the late Lloyd Holden that we were the beneficiaries of. But one of them was, he said to me one time, he said, being a judge is a very lonely life because it's very difficult when you're a sitting judge. You have to be extremely careful about who you speak to. You have to be extremely careful of who you're seen with. It all matters, and everything can and will, frankly, to quote the old Friday line, will be used against you. And, people are looking for reasons to take you down, if you will. And it is a very lonely life. And it is one that I think that people don't appreciate the sacrifices that judges make because they're people first. And they have all of the, weaknesses and of every other person, but they're held to this very, very high standard, as I suppose they should be, because it's the respect for the judge is not so much a respect for the individual, it's a respect for the office they hold. And they have to respect that office with their behavior.
Yeah, for sure. And, you speak about Judge Holden, who was a member of the Ontario Court of Appeal and a member of that bench, 1970s to the late 1980s. And at that period of time, people were not carrying iPhones around in their pocket, so to speak. But at the end of the day, look, a judge is an ordinary individual as well, and I think part of being a judge is that you do have to have a sense of the community that you live in to make good decisions. And part of the process now, I think, in terms of looking at people to be appointed to the court, is that they are not necessarily isolated, that they, are involved, and for sure that they're well-respected members, first of all, of their local bar, but they should be well-respected members of their community as well. So, a judge being isolated, I don't think is necessarily a good thing.
No, it's not. I don't think it's a good thing at all. I think that common sense is probably the most valuable asset that any judge has, and common sense is frankly best gathered from common people and common experience, and understanding the human condition. And it's not, I mean, it's one thing to be placed in the ivory tower of the Supreme Court as Justice Brown was, but you got to come down once in a while, see what's going on down on the street level in order to be able to pronounce a judgment on everyday people in terms of their interactions with each other. So I agree with you that it is very important to have a judiciary that is in touch, for lack of a better word, with society. But I think that it's really a hard line for judges to walk. And I say that with the greatest of respect. I say that in a way that I feel that it's a difficult task for any person in that situation who is in a position, frankly, of great power. But with great power comes great vulnerability in the sense that you're exposed. I mean, we've seen that repeatedly with high-level politicians whose exposure of a personal issue has led to their immediate downfall. So, someone like Russell Brown, who spent a lifetime building a career and a reputation to hold the highest office in the land as far as the judge is concerned, that all ended for him in the course of probably about a 40-minute altercation in a bar. I mean, that is quite the tragedy.
Well, and it when I read about the incident, Gavin, and taking the worst case scenario, in terms of assuming that the Mr. Crump's allegations against Justice Brown were correct. It seems to be a bit of a minor kind of incident in terms of, perhaps being a little bit under the influence of alcohol. And look, we're in the legal profession. And the reality is, in the legal profession, there are, colleagues or other members of the profession that do have substance abuse issues just because of the nature of the work. Lawyers are under a lot of pressure. So, there are lawyers in the profession who do abuse alcohol. There's drug abuse as well among some members of the bar. But when I think about what was the Canadian Judicial Council designed to do, is this the kind of incident that really should have been reviewed by the Canadian Judicial Council? And I think about that this council really should exist to monitor what a judge does in the courtroom, rather than to monitor what they do in their personal life, unless it's like absolutely egregious conduct where they've been involved in serious criminal acts. So I just wonder, in terms of Justice Brown resigning, was he resigning because the incident was true, or was it the pressure that was being exerted on him, perhaps politically, to kind of diffuse the entire situation?
Yeah, I think that's the political aspect of this is hugely important and not one to be forgotten. I mean, it's something that we don't really talk about a lot in Canada, but it's a huge issue, as we saw in the last election in the United States, is the power of the president to appoint members of the Supreme Court of the United States. That power in Canada resides in the Prime Minister. And the composition of the court and the interpretation of the Charter in Canada is as important, I would suggest, as the interpretation of the U.S. Constitution in terms of the way society is governed. It shapes the way that a society finds itself for many, many years to come. And in fact, oftentimes outlasts the particular administration that appointed them. That we see in the U.S. certainly in terms of the composition of the court right now. I'm thinking of the overturning of the Roe v. Wade decision, which was clearly a outcome based upon the persons appointed to the court. Now what we have is just former Justice Brown, who was appointed by former Prime Minister Harper, leaving a vacant seat on the Supreme Court to be filled by current Prime Minister Trudeau, who will invariably find someone who is acceptable and has views that he may or may that administration that he feels are aligned with that administration's views. I mean, there is an inherently political aspect to an appointment to the Supreme Court of Canada, just as there is to the appointment of the United States Supreme Court.
Except that we don't see it as much here in the Canadian context as you do in the U.S. context, where you have a full Senate hearing, where the justices are actually vetted.
Well, that's interesting, because does that make it more or less political? I mean,
it makes it more of a star chamber more political in the United States, but
I actually think that makes it more political in Canada, respectfully, and I'm not saying that in a way. I actually think our appointments have been exceptionally strong, but
it makes it less transparent in Canada.
It's far less transparent and therefore more inherently political, because there is no one to answer to in terms of the appointment. Whereas in the Senate hearings, I mean, as embarrassing and frankly sideshowish as they have become in recent years, I think that it gives fairly carte blanche to the Prime Minister's office to appoint whomever they choose. That's more political. There's no democratic element to that. There's very little political fallout, I would suggest, in Canada to the appointment of a Supreme Court justice, whereas there's huge political fallout in the United States to the appointment of Supreme Court justice.
Well, for me, Gavin, when you look at the entire judicial appointment process, whether it's at the federal level or the provincial level, because there are provincial court judges as well. And by the way, there is a Ontario Judicial Council as well, and there are bodies that also look at justices of the peace in terms of their behavior. The entire process is very interesting in terms of an appointment of a judge, and the lack of transparency, in my view, is actually a little troubling. At the federal court level, you actually aren't even interviewed when you make an application to be a judge. You send in, basically a banker's box of an application that's, I think, 20 different copies of the application, and there's just a group of people sitting around a table who are appointed to a body that decides who is going to be a judge, and that's your process. At least at the provincial level, there is I think a half-hour interview that an applicant goes through. But again, there's no real public vetting process for people to know who these judges are that end up being appointed to the bench.
Yeah, it's an interesting tension that we talk about here. I mean, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about, we often in Canada sort of dismissively look down at the United States process, where many judges are elected in certain jurisdictions. And it's like, electing a judge? Come on, the judges can't be politicians. If you're a judge, you have to be theoretically removed from the political fallout of a decision. You should be making the decision based on the merits of the individual case, not on what is this going to do for my chances of reelection. And I agree with that 100%, but there is that tension, if you will, between the need for an independent judiciary, independent from the political forces, free from political influence, and on the other hand, a judiciary that is open, transparent, and one that the people can understand, the electorate can understand how these individuals were placed in these positions of great power in our society. And there's a real tension there. And I don't know how it's resolved. I don't like the notion of elected judges. It just seems to me to be inherently corruptible, and the judges should not be deciding cases based on the popularity of the decision. They should be deciding matters on the basis of the legal merit and the facts of the individual case. I don't like the notion that judges pandering for votes. I find that quite unseemly. Maybe I'm just being a snobby Canadian when I say that.
Well, look, Gavin, I think you make some really great points, and perhaps that's where the judicial councils exist to provide some balance to that. In the case of where you do have a judge that really shouldn't be appointed because a mistake was made with respect to their appointment, or where it was too political, I guess, in terms of a friend being appointed to the bench when they weren't qualified to be appointed, and so to speak. That these councils exist to balance that. Now, the number of removals, my understanding from the bench has been very few and far between.
2.
Yeah, right. And basically there
in
have
50
been,
years.
Right, in 50 years. And I think my understanding of the history is that there have only been 11 public inquiries with respect to judges being looked into, federally appointed judges anyway. But the other troubling
before
aspect
we leave that, though, sorry to interrupt you. I want to be clear, though, that I said that kind of facetiously. Tone was probably not appropriate, but it is only 250 years. I actually think that's a testament to the judiciary. I think the fact that despite, as I said, with great power comes great vulnerability, that only 2 judges have been removed from the bench in 50 years is a remarkable testimonial to the absolute upstanding nature of our judiciary as the judicial class, if I can put it that way, that they have not strayed into these types of situations, and that they are by far and away exemplary in their character, behavior, etc., such that there have only been 2 in 50 years. And that I find is a testimony to the bench, and one of the reasons why I think the judiciary continues to enjoy such widespread respect by the population as a class in society.
I agree with that 100%. We've talked about it before here on this podcast. That overall, while one could be critical of individual decisions that are made by judges, for the most part, our judges get it right. And, they approach their job with a high degree of professionalism, neutrality, no bias. On occasion, complaints are made with respect to the bias of a judge, but that is very rare. And so overall, we have a great bench. But one of the other things that I think about is, we're adding now more tribunals to the decision-making process. The Law Society of Ontario, has a protocol where even a tribunal decision maker can have their conduct reviewed. But I think about integrity commissioners at the municipal level, and that there is no ability other than to bring an application for judicial review with respect to the conduct of an integrity commissioner when they're conducting their investigations, which can be highly politically charged.
Yes.
That there should be some kind of a body where, whether it's a complainant or a counselor who's subject to being investigated on a complaint, can go to where they think that the integrity commissioner has not carried out their responsibility appropriately or in a unbiased fashion. Now, I guess there's maybe a distinction between an integrity commissioner and a judge, in that an integrity commissioner is actually hired by the municipality. So, rather than being appointed through government. But nonetheless, I think these bodies...
That's appointed by government. If they're hired by the municipal government, they're appointed by government. Just a different government.
Well, that's true in that respect. But they're not appointed by the provincial government or federal government, and we know that municipal governments have no constitutional authority. But
and more importantly, nor are they independent, because as you pointed out, when I am hired by the municipality and my contract needs to be renewed by the municipality, it comes back to that my trepidation about elected judges. I don't particularly I think judges need to be objective at all times. And I think decision makers, and integrity commissioners are included in that, need to be objective. And when you're looking always sideways at how is this going to impact my future reemployment, be that in terms of reelection or be that in terms of my contract renewing, because this decision I'm going to make may not be popular with the majority of councillors in a given municipality who don't like this individual, I'm going to skew it a little bit this way. That to me is troubling. As a structural issue, judges need to be impartial, and that means don't worry about your own job. Don't worry about whether your own contract's going to be renewed. Don't worry about whether you're going to be elected in the next cycle.
I agree, and Gavin, you and I could drone on, but I think we've already,
as we often do.
I think we've droned on already for 30 minutes.
Droning. Yeah, well, it's not us at all. It's actually, just going back to our old episode, it's an artificial intelligence version of us. And so all of this is not real, and you better check the sources. Anyways, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you very much for listening. We thoroughly enjoy our chit-chats on these podcasts. I hope you get some enjoyment out of it. And maybe learn a little bit too, and hopefully provoke some thinking. Please give us any comments, kudos, criticisms. We're always looking for feedback to try to make this a little bit better for both us and for you, our listeners, who are the reason why we do it. So thanks very much again for tuning in. And as we always say, if no one is above the law, that means that everybody is beneath it.